פרק 23, chapter 23, Mishnah א', first Mishnah. משנתנו דנה, our Mishnah is going to deal באיסורי שבת שישנם בדיבור. In all the prohibitions of Shabbat that has to do with speech. So let's start. שואל אדם מחברו כדי יין וכדי שמן. A person is allowed to borrow from his friend jugs of wine and jugs of oil on Shabbat itself. Obviously, we're going to see in which manner one has to borrow it. ובלבד שלא יאמר לו הלווני. As long as you don't tell him, I'm taking it. In other words, you don't take it as a loan, but he's allowed to borrow it, but he's not allowed to take it as a loan, because that's going to be a business transaction, and we don't do business transaction on Shabbat. So there's going to be two different words over here: shoel, which means borrow, or halveni, which means a loan. And we're going to see the difference, that one is allowed to borrow what one is not allowed to loan on Shabbat. Ela hash'ileni, he says, I want to borrow. המבואר הטעם בגמרא, the Gemara says the reason, שאם יאמר לו הלווני, because if you say the word alone, חוששים שמא יבוא חברו לרשום בשבת את ההלוואה בפנקסו. We are worried maybe his friend is going to write it down in his book. Why? כדי שלא ישכחנה, because he's afraid to forget it. Because the term loan at that time, לפי שההלוואה משמעה לזמן מרובה. A loan means for a long period of time. אבל אם אומר לו השילני, but if he tells him, I'm just going to borrow, הואיל ושאלה היא לזמן מועט, since borrowing is obviously until Sunday where I can get it back to you, it is for a very small time period, אין חוששים שמא ירשום את זה בפנקסו. We're not worried he's going to forget it, and he's going to think he's going to forget it and write it down in his book. כך מפורשת הגמרא ברש"י. This is the way Rashi explains the Gemara. ומוסיף רש"י, Rashi continues and explains, שסתם ההלוואה היא ל30 יום. That when you say the word borrowing, if there's a document that says George borrowed from Yankee money, the borrow or jugs of wine, borrow means a period of time of at least 30 days. היא ל30 יום, it is for 30 days. ואילו בסתם שאלה, and when it's just a borrowing, צריך השואל להחזירה בכל זמן שהמשיל יתבענה. He needs, and it just, we says borrowing, the person has to return it immediately when the person is asking back for it and it is available. In other words, when you say borrow, I'll borrow it, the guy cannot come after 2 days and says, give me my borrowing back. He says, I have 30 days to give you your merchandise back in borrowing. In a loan. In a loan, you have 30 days to give back the loan. So the guy cannot come after a week and says, give me my loan back. You say, I have 3 more weeks and then I'll give it to you. When you say the word borrow, the guy can demand his merchandise back immediately after Shabbat is over. אבל לבעלי התוספות מקשים על רש"י, the בעלי תוספות disagree with this explanation of Rashi we just explained, ממה שאמרו, because they said, טלית שאולה, they said, a garment which is borrowed, כל 30 יום פטורה מן הציצית. It says, for 30 days one does not have to put tzitzit, the fringes on it. So from here we see that they give you 30 days, even on what? Even on borrowing. וכן מהלכות אחרות שנאמרו, and also from other laws that are told over there, שמוכח מהם, that you can prove from them, שגם סתם שאילה יש 30 יום, that just regular borrowing is also for 30 days. מכאן מבארים בעלי התוספות. From over here, the Tosfos explains, את הגמרא בדרך אחרת. They explain the Gemara in a completely different manner, which we're going to learn now. שלשון שאלה, when we say the word borrow, הוא לרוב על דבר החוזר באין. It's usually on something that returns the way it is. הילקח, אין חוששים שמא ירשום אותה החנווני. In other words, when you borrow your X. Can I borrow your X? I'm returning not a different X, I'm returning this specific X. ואילו ההלוואה היא בדבר שאינו חוזר בעינו. And a loan is I'm borrowing a jug of wine Obviously, I'm borrowing the jug of wine, not to give it to you back, the same jug of wine tomorrow. I'm going to drink this jug of wine today, and I'm going to give you a different, identical jug of wine the next day. ולפיכך, כשאומר לו הלווני, this is why when it says, I'm going to take it as a loan, חוששים שמא ירשום את זה בפנקסו בשבת. You're worried, maybe you're going to write it down in your book on Shabbat, because you are not going to receive the same thing. You're going to receive a different thing. But if it's the X, I'm going to receive the same X. I don't need to write it down. I know it's my X. ואף על פי שכדי יין וכדי שמן אינה חוזרים בעינם, but over here the whole thing doesn't make sense. We're talking about jugs of wine. We're talking about jugs of oil. They're not going to return the same way. You're borrowing them in order to drink them. מכל מקום, מתוך שאמר לו בלשון השאילני, but nevertheless, Tosfos says, since you say השאילני, the word loan, the person might start writing it down because whenever he hears loan, he is used to writing it down. So therefore, so that he's not going to be used to writing it down, he says instead of using the word loan, halveni, use the word borrow, so that he will not write it down. Even though that in our case, it is actually borrowing because you're not bringing back the same produce. So that the person is not going to write it down in his booklet. וכן האישה, the same thing. The woman, מחברתה כיכרות, she borrows from her friend bread. שואלת אישה מחברתה כיכרות בשבת. A woman borrows bread from her friend on Shabbat. ובלבד שלא תאמר לה בלשון הלוואה, as long as she doesn't say it, it's a loan, because again we're going to afraid somebody might write it down. ואם אינו מאמינו, and if this guy who comes over to you, you don't know him, or he's not trustworthy, what do you do then? הבא לשאול צרכי מזון מחברה בשבת, somebody who comes to borrow food from his friend on Shabbat, והלה אינו רוצה לתת לו, and you don't want to give it to him, מפני שאינו מאמינו שיחזיר לו את תמורתם, because he is known to be the one who just borrows and never returns. So it says, and the guy sees that he's not going to be able to borrow food for Shabbat, so what does he do? He says he's allowed to do that. מניח טליתו אצלו, he's allowed to leave his garment, his coat, his overcoat, by the person he's borrowing the food from. רשאי השואל להניח טליתו, he's allowed to leave his garment, היינו בגדו העליון, which means it's upper garment, אצל המשיל, by the one he's borrowing it. ובלבד שלא יאמר לו שבגד זה יהיה משכון אצלו. As long as he doesn't tell him, this is my collateral, because it becomes then a business transaction if you tell him this is my collateral. So as long as you don't tell him this is my collateral, he says, hey, I'm just leaving it over here, I'm going to pick it up later on. אבל אלא מניחו אצלו סתם. He just puts it by him in a regular manner without mentioning that this is a collateral. ועושה ישמו חשבון לאחר שבת, and after Shabbat he can make a calculation with him of how much it was worth, the wine or the oil he took. כמו שהוא חייב, כמה שהוא חייב לו בעד הדברים של בכך שבת. So after Shabbat they make a calculation how much he owes him for the things he took during Shabbat. Same things is going to happen in Yerushalayim. What happened in Yerushalayim? כן ערב פסח בירושלים שחל להיות בשבת. What happens if Pesach happens to be on Shabbat? So Erev Pesach is Friday. So Friday, no. וכן ערב פסח בירושלים שחל להיות בשבת. That Erev Pesach is on a Sunday. Sorry, Pesach is going to be on a Sunday. So Erev Pesach is on a Shabbos. So now you're going to have to bring the Pesach sacrifice, which is allowed to be brought on a Shabbos. Usually regular sacrifice is not allowed to be brought on Shabbos, but Pesach sacrifice is. So now you have the Pesach sacrifice that one is allowed to be brought on a Shabbos. But you cannot have money transaction. So you should do it for a Thursday. But if you didn't get your sheep on a Thursday, what do? On a Shabbos, you're allowed to go to the merchant and do the following. ושכח אדם לקנות סל לקורבן פסח מערב שבת. You forgot to buy the Pesach sacrifice on a Friday, and now it's Shabbos, and tomorrow, and today you have to bring the Pesach sacrifice. So what would you do? מניח טליתו אצלו. You would go to a person who has a herd of sheep. You're allowed to leave your garment by him. אצל מוכר הבהמות, the one who sells animals, ונוטל את פסחו. And then you're allowed to take your Pesach sacrifice. סל לפסחו. והואיל והקרבת הפסח זמן קבוע, even like we mentioned before, regular sacrifices are not allowed to be brought on Shabbat, but since Pesach sacrifice has an established time, וקרב אף בשבת, and one brings the Pesach sacrifice, even if Erev Pesach falls on Shabbat, even if the day before Pesach is on Shabbat, where one has to bring the Pesach sacrifice, מותר לו גם להקדיש בשבת את הסל לקורבן הפסח. He's allowed to bring on Shabbat the sheep for Korban Pesach. ועושה עמו חשבון לאחר יום טוב. And he makes with him the calculation after יום טוב. אינו רשאי לעשות את החשבון עם מוכר הבהמות. He will not be allowed to make the calculation with the merchant of animals, אלא לאחר יום טוב, only after יום טוב. שהרי למחרת השבת חל להיות פסח, because the next day happens to be פסח. ואף ביום טוב אסור לעשות חשבון, and one is not allowed to make the calculation even on a יום טוב.